Good morning. This is Candace Kavanaugh, and I'm with Orton Kavanaugh and Holmes. And we're going to talk about board and member meetings this morning. First, I need to make a disclaimer. The information in the video is informational, and it's not intended to provide specific legal advice. We always find that in many instances, your governing documents may control over information that's in the statute. So we're going to discuss board meetings, member meetings, and options to conduct a meeting virtually, as well as options for taking action outside of a meeting. If there is no pressing business, typically a meeting can be postponed. However, virtual phone and video conferencing tools allow the association to continue to perform regular business functions that would otherwise be conducted at a meeting. So we'll start off with board meetings. Virtual board meetings are not addressed in Kiowa. However, they are permitted under the Colorado Nonprofit Act. The statute says that directors can participate or conduct a board meeting through any means of communication by which all directors can hear each other. That has the effect, if they're all participating, of meeting the quorum requirements for the meeting. They don't all have to participate, but those who do participate meet the quorum requirements. One of the things we're going to find as we go through this is that there are a lot of provisions in the Nonprofit Act that say that unless otherwise provided in the bylaws, then the statute will dictate how or what you can do. Under Kiowa, board meetings are to be open to members, and members or associations are encouraged to provide notice of board meetings to their members, which in many cases is done by posting the meeting times and dates on the website. So when using virtual meetings, to the extent that's feasible, we should try and have a means for owners to participate when they are permitted to participate under the terms of Kiowa, which is typically prior to a vote on an action by the board. The other thing to keep in mind is that although we're encouraging associations to be open and transparent so members can participate in the meeting of the board and can listen to what's being discussed even when they don't have an opportunity to participate, the statute doesn't actually require notice. So if you have to get your board together quickly and there isn't adequate time for notice, or posting on the website is not likely to be seen by your members, it doesn't mean that you can't go ahead and have your board meeting. That's how you can take action at a board meeting. You can do this by video conference or by conference call, whatever works for your community. There's also a statutory procedure for taking action outside of a board meeting. However, that's one of those provisions that uses that phrase, unless otherwise provided in the bylaws. You know, we do see provisions in bylaws at times that would prohibit you from taking an action outside a meeting. This is outside of a board meeting. Sometimes the bylaws will require unanimous consent to the directors to take action outside of a board meeting. And sometimes, even if they don't require unanimous consent, they require that all board members cast votes. Again, depending on what your documents say, you may or may not be able to use the statutory provision. The other thing to keep in mind about the statutory provision is that it was first enacted in the late 90s. And it has been modified, not substantially, but in minor ways over the years. And depending on when your bylaws were drafted, they may have been drafted using an earlier version of the statutory provision on taking actions outside of a board meeting. So again, it is really important that you go ahead and you look at your bylaws. If you have nothing in your bylaws, you can typically take advantage of the statutory provision. And that just simply requires that we have basically state what the action is that the board is to take, that notice is sent out to all the board members, that a deadline is provided by which a response must be made, and then that the directors either vote in favor, they vote against, or they fail to demand that the action actually be taken at a meeting. The one thing to keep in mind is that if a person doesn't vote, that's considered to be an abstention. And if they fail to demand that the action be taken at a meeting, then they've waived that option. The action is approved at the end of the day if you equal or exceed the number of votes that would be necessary to take the action at a meeting at which all of the directors were present and participating. So your assumption when you're doing this outside of a meeting is that everybody was participating in the meeting. So that's a brief overview of board meetings. We can move now on to member meetings. And in this case, everything we do is conditioned on, unless the bylaws otherwise provide. So why are we going to take action at the member meeting? Why are we not just postponing our member meetings? Well, first of all, or having a physical member meeting. We know we can't, in most cases, have a physical member meeting because of limitations under Colorado public health orders that we limit the number of people that are gathered for a meeting or any other event. Getting back again to the Nonprofit Act and our limitation on what our bylaws might otherwise provide. What do we see with bylaws? Well, the typical thing we see with bylaws for member meetings is that unless all members consent to taking an action outside of a meeting, well, you can't do it. That's unanimous consent. That's really difficult to obtain in most instances. Why else might we want to conduct a member meeting? Well, you know, a lot of us are at our homes now and not getting out and not having the same social interaction that we have been used to having. And in some respects, maybe it just contributes to some degree of normalcy that we could get on a video or a phone conference and talk about something other than COVID-19. Also, we have communities where they're having their annual meetings now. Perhaps they have contested elections. Perhaps the members really want that election to take place, because typically under most bylaws and the default of the Nonprofit Act is that the directors will serve until their successors are elected. And if there's some indication that the members feel strongly they want that vote to continue, then we will be looking at the ways that we can accomplish that. So how do we vote at a virtual meeting? Well, if you were on a conference call and you didn't have to have a secret vote, you could basically do a roll call and ask for each person to vote yay or nay, up or down, however the vote may be structured. The other thing we have to consider, though, is particularly with regard to elections of directors, Kiowa says that if we do have a contested election, then that vote has to be taken by secret ballot. There are electronic voting services. They may be able to accomplish a vote by secret ballot. And if you can, then certainly that would be an option for the association to consider. If you can't, then maybe we're looking at our other option for having meetings, which is to take action outside of the meeting. And once again, just as in the conduct of meetings, outside of a physical meeting, the action outside of a meeting is conditioned on what may be in your bylaws. The bylaws that otherwise provide, you might see, well, we already talked about this. If the members don't all agree to it, then you're not going to be able to do it. But if you can, the statute allows for it. And it's a pretty straightforward requirement. You have to send a solicitation for votes. You have to give people a deadline to vote. You have to say what the quorum requirement is, what the percentage is that's required to approve the action. Or if it's a vote of the directors, that's not going to be a percentage. That's typically going to be a plurality. And you have to also give people enough information so that they can make an educated decision as to how they want to vote. So the ballot has to tell people, the ballot itself, not the notice, has to tell people that they can vote for or against, or if you're talking about election, you can then identify the people who are running and the individual can select how they are voting. But keep in mind, again, if that is an election of directors, it's a contested election, you're going to have to keep that vote secret. So either you're using an electronic voting service that can maintain the secrecy of the votes, or just like we have a lot of mail-in elections for municipal state elections, you can also use a double envelope system and mail those ballots to the owners with that same information in it that we just discussed. These types of ballots are, interestingly enough, not revocable. Unlike when you have a proxy and you go to the meeting, you can revoke your proxy by attendance at the meeting or by giving a subsequent proxy. But these types of ballots for action outside of a meeting cannot be revoked. Just in conclusion, let's just think through a few things that you're also going to want to consider with regard to virtual meetings. And there are questions that you're going to want to investigate when you're looking at the various options, whether they're video options like Zoom and GoToMeeting and Skype, and there's a plethora of resources available on the internet, or whether it's a phone conference meeting. Some of these services are free, some of them have a cost. The ones that are free will often limit the number of participants, or they may also limit the time that you have for your meeting. So it's important to take those things into consideration when you're deciding whether there's a free service you can use or whether it's worth the association paying for a higher level of service. And when you're looking at voting and you're looking at electronic voting services that are available for HOAs, depending on what you may be voting on, you may want to see if they have the ability to maintain the secrecy of votes. Also, you might look at how sign-in procedure is going to work. It may be that this is the time that it makes sense to ask people if they're going to want to speak and what they think they're going to want to speak to. And if you have an agenda for your meeting, that might be easier for people to determine what they might want to speak to. And the last thing that we want to make sure of is that there is a mechanism by which owners or members can ask questions. That might be through some type of a muting system where the meeting host has the ability to mute and unmute people if they know that somebody wants to ask a question, or some of them have a chat option where the member can write up their question, it comes to the host can read it, the board can respond to it. I wanted to mention that Erin Goodlock at our office has written an article on virtual meetings in the world of social distancing, and I would refer you to that for some additional information. If you have any questions, all of our attorneys are working remotely now, and they will answer your emails and they will answer their phone calls. So if you have questions, please feel free to get in touch with any one of our attorneys. Thank you.